This is the Radically Realistic Podcast. I'm Susanna LaPointe, a 14-year personal training and nutrition coaching veteran. My wellness coaching practice incorporates strength, nutrition, and self-care. Because while fitness and nutrition are very important, they are just the tip of the iceberg as far as taking really amazing care of ourselves goes. So I incorporate all other types of self-care practices into my coaching as well. I call this podcast Radically Realistic because when it comes to implementing sustainable habits and practices to improve ourselves or our lives, they must be realistic and they must fit into our current lives. Otherwise, they won't stick. And then what even is the point? Join me each week as we explore another aspect of taking amazing care of ourselves through a lens of being super realistic about what we can and will actually fit into our lives. Let's get started with today's show. Hey there, friends. Thank you so much for joining me today on episode 16 of the Radically Realistic Podcast. Today we are going to be talking about a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, and that is the topic of injuries and chronic pain. I can say with some confidence that about 100% of humans will deal with something like this at some point in their life, and it's super frustrating. I've had so many clients struggle with annoying chronic pain or injuries, and I have a bunch right now, and I myself am struggling with chronic pain and injuries right now. So I thought I would offer a little perspective and wisdom from a seasoned injury sustainer, if that's even a thing, on how to deal with these minor and often major annoyances that definitely will pop up during our lifetime. Often multiple times over the course of all of our years alive. So, to give a little context, I'm going to list out the injuries I have sustained since becoming active. At the age of about 26, 27, I started exercising like for reals. I had always been very inactive my whole life. I would consider myself very lazy as like a teenager and a young adult. I was definitely not interested in exercising. So after I had my second child, I decided to start exercising because I wanted to lose the baby weight. And I remember that right away, as soon as I started moving my body, my knees started hurting. And up until about a year ago, my knees have been a big problem. I've always considered them my weak link. They just always flared up. They hurt when I did anything. They swelled and became super inflamed after I did anything. I couldn't hike. I couldn't walk for a while because they were just so painful. I don't even know exactly what the cause of it was, but probably about a year and a half ago, I started taking CBD oil really consistently, and that seems to have mostly resolved the problem. My knees are a lot better now. But besides that, I had chronic full body pain for about 8 years, and that kind of cleared up a couple years ago. Still not exactly sure what caused that either. Spent a lot of time trying to figure that one out. Many practitioners tried to figure that one out. I tore my ACL and had ACL reconstruction surgery, which is a pretty major knee surgery. I had a nasty case of sciatica for several years. I've had plantar fasciitis in both feet. Last year, I sprained my ankle and my wrist at the same time. I broke one of my toes and it got better, and then I re-broke it like a couple weeks later. So I had like 12 weeks of broken toe, which means I couldn't walk, like go for walks, which was annoying. And I'm currently dealing with a shoulder impingement and some sort of issue in my hip that I'm not sure what it is. So I know very well about dealing with injuries, working around them, working with them, and I also know how incredibly frustrating and unmotivating having an injury is. So let's talk about how to handle when our bodies don't feel the way we would like them to. From my perspective, there are two types of injuries. There are acute injuries, which is an injury sustained by a thing that happens, like tearing your ACL when you're jumping on the trampoline, or twisting your ankle and causing a sprain in your ankle, or breaking your wrist when you're skiing, as one of my clients has done. With acute injuries, you usually go to the doctor, you get diagnosed, and there's usually some sort of fix. Sometimes it's physical therapy for something more minor, like a sprained ligament, or sometimes it's surgery for something more major, like a torn ligament or a broken bone that won't heal on its own. Okay, so those are acute injuries. And then there are chronic injuries, which is something that kind of pops up. Generally, it pops up slowly, maybe gets a little bit worse over time, maybe gets a lot worse over time, and it just hangs out for a really long time. And it may or may not go away on its own. With chronic injuries, they're a little harder to deal with, I think. I kind of refer to them as lifestyle injuries, kind of like what I have right now. It's probably due to a posture situation, and I think my hip issue was due to hiking up too many steep hills, and it aggravated my hip flexor muscle. I'm not totally sure, but they're from lifestyle things. A lot of times these things can be resolved with stretches or self-massage or physical therapy exercises. Nothing super crazy, but sometimes they take a really long time to heal. Or they don't heal and you're just stuck with them for like months or even years at a time, and then you have to figure out how to deal with them. They are extremely frustrating. A lot of times it's not entirely clear what has caused them, and the solution is also not very clear. They often start as a niggling pain and then progress to something much bigger and a little bit hard to understand. Sometimes the pain like wraps around. Like in my hip right now, I have like acute pain in my hamstring insertion, kind of in my butt, but it wraps around to the front, and I'm like not really sure where the injury is or what to focus my efforts on. My hip flexor seems tight, and I do the stuff like stretching and self-massage, and it doesn't really seem to help. So what do we do in these situations? With myself, and whenever I'm working with a client that has a nagging, seemingly minor injury, I often suggest some stretches and self-massage to start with. Oftentimes, this clears it right up. Like a shoulder knot, like a knot in your shoulder blade, you can clear that up yourself. And it feels like a big thing at the time, but once you figure out that it's like a muscle knot, you can figure it out and clear it up. But sometimes it doesn't always resolve within a couple of weeks or a couple of days or a couple of months. And in that case, I always suggest going to a physical therapist to get a preliminary diagnosis and corrective exercises that, if you do them, really do work. Sometimes these things can grow a little bit bigger, sometimes a lot bigger, and pretty soon you've got chronic pain that's been lasting for months or longer. This is when these things can really cause problems. If you have been dealing with a chronic injury or chronic pain for a while now, you know how much that chronic pain affects your life. It clouds your view of the world. It makes everything seem a little bit darker. Your mood starts to suck, and pretty much all activity seems a little bit scary because you don't know if it's going to further aggravate the pain. I've been here many, many times. This is one of the issues I seek to combat in coaching with my clients, because often these injuries can take you out of being active for long periods of time. And this is what I've found. A lot of people will quit if they have started an exercise routine and then there's an injury of some sort or some sort of chronic pain, and then they just stop exercising altogether. This is when, like, this is like just for like humans in general, this happens a lot. So this is what I seek to avoid with my clients. A lot of times when they're working with me, they hurt themselves in some way, usually unrelated. I had a client last week who like threw her back out. I'm not really sure what that means. Getting out of a car. So in a lot of cases, people would just stop moving at that point in time. But when I'm working with my clients, I'm like, let's figure out what you can do, and then we will keep going. Because this is a time when it kind of can break or make or break your habit that you're building on moving consistently. So I really seek to keep my clients as active as possible through these rough patches, because everyone gets injured. Like throughout our lives, we are going to get injured. And like a lot of times it's as random as getting out of a car. So we've got to stay active during these times. But this is when we have to ask, what can I do? And here are some ideas on how to deal with these things. First idea, seek treatment. Don't wait too long to see a physical therapist or a body worker of some kind to start making progress towards eliminating the problem. In this case, I would often ask people to refer you to someone who they trust, they like, they've had good success with. Like a chiropractor, some of them are great, some of them are terrible. Physical therapists, often there are some that are better than others. A body worker of some kind, an acupuncturist. Get recommendations from people to find the good ones, because there's a lot of not great ones out there. So finding a good fit and finding someone to kind of get started in on figuring out what this is a good place to start. Idea number 2, in most cases, even with pretty obnoxious lower body injuries, you can still walk. Maybe it's not for very long, maybe it's not very far, but continuing to walk as much as possible is generally the first thing I would recommend if your injury isn't something related with your feet where you literally can't walk. Keep walking. Idea number 3, if you have a lower body injury, now is a good time to get really strong in your upper body. You can work on your push-ups, your core, your overhead pressing, you can work on your pulling, make your back really strong. There's lots of things you can do to keep your upper body strong. Conversely, if it's your lower body that has an injury, your upper body that has an injury, you can use this time to make your lower body really strong. You can work your core again, but you can also focus on your glutes, your hips, and your legs. I think idea number 3, if your injury is a back injury, you can work on your core. This is a little bit more tricky because back injuries can be a little scary. Figuring out what you can do, though, that doesn't flare up your back pain will help you get stronger. And if you work on your core while your back is compromised, it should help your back pain for sure. Most back injuries are caused by weak core. So figuring out the exercises you can do, and this is where it would be helpful to probably work with someone who is an expert at this, figuring out the things that you can do that don't flare up your back, but continuing to work your core. Often you can do some supportive strength work too, like ball squats, as opposed to just regular squats out in the open. You can protect your back by leaning against a ball, against a wall, and still squatting with your legs, but your back is totally protected. Number 5, now I forget what number 1. 5, number 5. In most cases, there are things that we can do to stay as active as possible while figuring out the cause of pain and injury and healing it. Most times these injuries heal much slower than we would like them to, but from what I've found with most people, chronic, weird, random pain and injuries tend to eventually go away. While we are in it, it feels like they are never going to go away, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives in pain, and it's really obnoxious and annoying. But one day down the road, we always look back and we're like, oh yeah, I remember when I had XYZ pain, and now it's gone. I've noticed it in a lot of my clients and myself as well. So keeping our spirits up while struggling with injuries and chronic pain is another story. I have, of course, dealt with this so many times, and it is so discouraging to be sidelined by pain or an acute injury. Sometimes the acute injuries are a little bit better because there's usually a 6 to 8 week healing time that is pretty standard, and you usually know that it's going to be fixed within a certain number of weeks. So it's a little bit harder to deal with chronic pain because it kind of wears on you, it drags you down, it lasts a long time. Sometimes we have no idea what caused it or when it's going to go away. Sometimes it can go away and then start to come back. Sometimes we can aggravate it, make it worse before it gets better. These things can all suck the color out of our world. So here's a few ideas on how to deal with long-term pain without it fully driving us completely crazy. Number 1, stay as active as possible. Any movement will make us feel better than no movement, especially if it's the type of movement that is outside getting fresh air and vitamin D and sunlight into our eyeballs, like walking. This is always the preferred method of movement if it is tolerable. If that's not possible, working with a professional to figure out the things that you can actually still do is imperative. Otherwise, you risk becoming really deconditioned while you're out of commission due to this injury and can end up much worse than where you started. Oftentimes, by strengthening your core, your pelvic floor, your glutes, your hips, and working on posture, sometimes these injuries will just clear up. That is what I'm hoping for mine, honestly, working with my core and my pelvic floor and getting all this stuff really strong. I'm hoping that my stuff will just clear up too. So stay as active as you can without flaring up the pain. That definitely could take some trial and error, but it's worth it to figure out the things that you can do to get as much movement in your life as possible. Number 2 idea, meditation. I mentioned this in almost all of my episodes, but it's for a reason, and it's because having a regular meditation practice can help you deal with pain. It calms you on a deep level and helps you learn to be with the pain instead of fighting against it. I definitely struggle with fighting with pain. I always want to be as active as possible, so I'm always very angry when I can't do what I want to do. But meditation has definitely helped. I know when I had my knee surgery, I'd been meditating, I think, for several months up until that point. And I used that to keep me grounded and sane during that extremely frustrating time of not being able to do the things I wanted to do. Getting in tune and present with your breath, as cliche as it sounds, is ultimately very healing. It can do wonders for our mood and our anxiety, and it can make the whole process a little bit more pleasant. It can take the edge off a little bit. For those of us who are a little bit driven to move a lot, it can be really difficult to spend more time inactive. But one day, again, we usually look back and we're like, oh yeah, I remember when I couldn't move due to this injury or that injury, and man, I'm glad I'm not there anymore. It always goes away. Number 3, nutrition. This is a tough one because when we are less mobile and dealing with pain, I know how hard it is to make nutrition and getting solid, health-promoting nutrients a priority. Comfort foods are definitely calling. Sugar is our friend when we are uncomfortable. I know firsthand how hard it is to stay on track with nutrition when things aren't feeling good. But making it a priority is really important. First of all, good nutrition helps the overall inflammation situation. And as most of us know, pain is generally caused by inflammation of some kind. Sugar, processed foods, and especially inflammatory oils, like the oils that things are deep fried in, also that tortilla chips are fried in, which is my favorite food on the whole planet, are super inflammatory. Those oils are really bad for you. Not to say that once in a while is a problem, but I know that it's really easy when you're feeling uncomfortable to crave comfort foods and not give a shit about salad and other nutrient-dense foods. Really, really try to rein that in. Nourish your body with foods that are nutrient-dense and non-inflammatory. Inflammatory foods are going to be processed, lots of flour, lots of sugar, lots of salt, lots of cheese usually. All the good stuff. Anyways, try to stay mostly on track with the veggies and the high quality proteins and the fruit and things that are not inflammatory. It's really, really important. They also will help your mood. If you're eating health promoting foods, even if you're in a bad mood, it's going to be better than if you're eating sugar and a bunch of processed crap. Your mood will be way worse if that happens. And the last point is know that this will pass. Like I mentioned before, most of these nagging injuries do pass. Sometimes it takes quite a while. Like I mentioned, I had this chronic pain for about 8 years, but one day I realized it was finally gone. I don't actually know what got rid of it. I tried so many things over the years, but it was just gone one day. One day I realized. So knowing that these things will pass can sort of help. I'm sure most people's things won't last 8 years. That was kind of weird. But like where I am now, I am pretty sure my shoulder will feel better at some point, and I am positive my hip will feel better at some point. Sometimes these things just kind of need to work their way through and out, and sometimes you need an actual protocol to strengthen the weak muscles that are causing the pain or whatever it is that's causing the imbalance in your body. And it can take a while, but it should resolve. This is why I recommend seeing a physical therapist or another practitioner sooner rather than later who can help you diagnose and be proactive about dealing with it. We are in an age where a lot of our injuries are caused from sitting and being on computers way too much. I have a sneaking suspicion that that is why my shoulder is hurting right now. Across the board, because of this pandemic, people are sitting so much more than they were and walking so much less. This is causing a lot of front of the body tightness and weakness and back of the body weakness. This causes imbalances and can manifest into some pretty painful situations, like in your shoulders and your neck and your back. I myself went from training in person with my clients, moving around all day long, getting up and down off the floor with them, and basically just being a lot more active than I am now, to where my sessions are conducted via a screen. And while I am standing, I do end up sitting quite a bit more because I'm doing a lot more work on my computer, which I think is the case for most people right now. God bless COVID. And I feel like this is why my shoulder has kind of rolled forward a bit and caused a pattern problem. The way I've dealt with my shoulder injury is to go to physical therapy. I went one time and I got a diagnosis that confirmed my suspicions that it was an impingement, not a tear. I think I mentioned this earlier. And then I've done my own research to figure out the exercises needed to strengthen the parts of my body that will reposition my shoulder into the right place. As far as my hip goes, I have just made an appointment with a body worker because it's been going on for about 2 months now, and I'm going to get started on working on it. I'm very proactive with my injuries because I'm super motivated and I do not like to be in pain. So I suggest to everyone in this situation that you are proactive about your pain. You don't want to sit in it for too long without addressing it. Oftentimes, the fix is just some exercises and maybe changing the way you do a few things. Yes, it's a hassle to get all of this taken care of, but it's a bigger hassle to be in pain. So if you're dealing with any type of injury, I highly recommend you start seeking out help so that you are at least making progress. I remember when I was deep in the middle of those 8 years of that chronic pain that I had, and someone said to me, you may as well just accept the fact that you're going to have chronic pain and you're going to be dealing with it forever. And I was thinking, I am actually not willing to accept that fact. I feel like it's good for morale to constantly be trying to improve your situation. So always seeking answers, always looking for ways to feel better, always looking for things you can do to remedy the situation. It keeps your morale up if you're seeking for answers. If you just give up, your morale goes down. And then you're like, I guess I'm going to be dealing with this forever. And then you just let yourself go in some cases. And that is not good for anyone. So yeah, always seeking answers and looking for ways to feel better. Getting stuck in a pain spiral is not good for your psyche, not good for your mood, and it's not good for the people that you love because you're probably not very nice. So I just wanted to share my thoughts and experiences with injury and chronic pain. I'm pretty sure everyone will be dealing with it at some point in their life. I mentioned to a client the other day that I feel like after the age of 35, you're just playing whack-a-mole with your injuries. Like one pops up and you resolve it, and then another one pops up and you resolve it, and you rinse and repeat that forever. But I think the more you deal with these things, the more experience you have, the more you understand the body. Like our bodies can't be perfect all the time. They have to. Our lifestyle is toxic. It's just hard. It's hard for our bodies to maintain the perfect amount of function when we're sitting all the time and just doing all the things that we didn't used to have to do. Our bodies are, not cool with it. So just be aware that it will probably happen at some point. It's not the end of the world, and there are people out there that can help you deal with it. That is it for me today. As always, I would love to hear from you. Please contact me at any of the avenues below in the show notes if you have any comments or questions. And thank you so much for listening. Please share, rate, and review if you haven't already. And I hope you have a beautiful day. I will talk to you next week. And goodbye.